This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you.
10% of pediatric cancer is linked to a single gene variation. These variants can be detected in embryos before pregnancy begins. Orkin's whole genome reports can help mitigate your child's risk for cancer by screening for 90-plus genetic variants linked to pediatric cancer. Discuss embryo screening and IVF with a genetics expert. Hey, everybody. It's Razib here with the Unsupervised Learning podcast, and we have a returning guest, my friend Sarah Haider. I have been on her podcast several times, I think 2 times. Several is, 2 times. A Special Place in Hell. She also has a Substack, and we might talk a little bit about that, her own one. But Special Place in Hell is with Megan Daum, and she is former executive director of ex-Muslims of North America. That's how I know her. She used to speak about Islam and secularism and stuff a lot. Less so now. So, a couple of years, I think is it maybe 5 years ago or 4 years ago, I did a podcast with you, Sarah, actually, for my Brown Pundits podcast, which I don't contribute to that much anymore. Other people do it now mostly. But you were talking about how you were going to move into gender and those sorts of issues which you have in those years. And it comes up all the time on A Special Place in Hell, partly because Megan's obsessed with it too, which is fine. It's a big thing in our culture. And one thing that I'm going to tell you, and I was just telling you before we got on, I do get requests for gender diversity occasionally, mostly actually from my female subscribers. And I don't have that. I think anyone who looks can see that. And I kind of ignore people that ask about racial diversity because I'm on every single podcast, so I figure that's enough. But in any case, one thing that I've noticed is that I can reach out to some random dude who has never heard of me, and he'll come on and talk about on the podcast about all the stuff he's doing that's interesting. And then if I have a female friend and I know her, it's extremely difficult to get a response that's affirmative. When I cold, and I don't actually ever, almost never cold call or cold message women I don't know, but women that I've DM'd with before, when I ask them, probably the majority of the time they ignore me. They don't respond. They just don't want to deal with it, And so I know that this was an issue with op-eds years ago. They just get way more male submissions. And so, women want representation. They want to see, people like them speaking, but they also don't want to speak. So, I don't know what to do about it. Because the women who do speak, like you, probably get a little annoyed by how many requests they get.
I also say no to more requests than I should. I'm not really annoyed by it because it's, an opportunity just set up for me and an audience set up for me. And I think more happy to embarrass myself than other women. I think that's what it is. That is what it is. I think women don't want to embarrass themselves. And they're very conscious of the potential negative consequences, both personally, but also societally, if they get something wrong, and contribute in a horrible way to something. I remember with the ex-Muslim stuff, a lot of really interesting ex-Muslim female writers and speakers would not contribute as much as I know they wanted to, they wouldn't, they would have an opinion. I would say, hey, write about this, and I will share and promote it. And I will get you, a speaking slot at somewhere at some conference, whatever, pull whatever strings to make it happen. And I think they were so concerned that the wrong people would use them and what they had to say to, hurt Muslims somewhere. And that kind of thinking through the social consequences of speech, in this very broad, kind of almost fearful way, focusing on specifically what the harms could be instead of what, they could possibly gain from it. I think that's a very woman thing. Also, women punish other women a lot more for being, quote unquote, arrogant and just like speaking when before being like perfectly prepared or whatever. I get a lot of that all the time. And I understand it, I understand where it's coming from, but it is like definitely sexism.
Yeah, I would say I actually pretty much go on. I don't know. The only podcast that I've ever turned down going on was like one that had Nazis on it, and that was about it. But I've gone on pretty much everything. A lot of times smaller podcasters, they reach out to me because they want me to be one of the earlier people. Actually, do you know Dorkesh Patel?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I don't know him personally.
Yeah. Well, I was one of the earliest people on Dorkesh's podcast.
Oh, cool.
So,
yeah.
we used to hang out when he was in Austin. I still see him when I'm in SF. But anyway, like now he's got Zuck on, So you never know where these like random nobodies will go. That's probably I'm not like making a conscious calculation about that sort of thing, but multiple people that I've done podcasts with have gotten considerably bigger. I mean, I'm probably sure a lot of people actually that I've done podcasts with disappeared. I don't know who they are. I don't know where those podcasts are, because I occasionally get people who tell me like, "Oh, I saw you on so and so's podcast," and I have no idea what that podcast. But the thing is, like, they're gonna ask me about genetics. They're gonna ask me about the same stuff. So it's not like gonna be a distinct thing that I'm gonna be able to pin down. But I pretty much say yes to everything. And I do have to say, the issue with haters, not reference to your name, haters, is I've been out there for a long time. You have too, and you're just gonna have haters are gonna be out there, and they're gonna way outnumber in many ways the non-haters, and that's just like the way the internet works. So I had a friend, and she went to school with a guy who works at OpenAI, and he was one of the nerds that was talking to Sky in a video, and he was just getting roasted. And I just had to explain to her, well, when you go from 0 to 1, when you go from like a nobody to somebody, they're just going to hate on you. That's just how it is. Mm-hmm. And it's not personal. It's just the internet, But obviously that has a different impact depending on how neurotic you are. Yeah. And women are more neurotic on average than men. I think that's the primary issue here.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a big part of it. I don't think that, Megan and I talked a little bit about this. I think mostly privately, but also publicly, like on the podcast itself. It's so hard for me to remember what are our private conversations and then when the podcast, like when we hit record, because sometimes we'll just, continue on a conversation that we've been having privately. But, she competes with other like kind of female writers and thinkers and speakers. Like she compares herself to like, oh, how is my Substack doing versus this other like female writer or whatever. And I remember being a little bit surprised by that, because I don't compare myself to only women. Like I don't, when I compare myself to anyone at all, it's to everybody. I don't, and and out of the people that I think of, it's usually not women who I think like, oh, I'm a lot like this person, and so I should have the kinds of followers as this person has, or as much success as this person has. I think there's something there's a lot going on there. I'm not surprised that there aren't more women speaking. I don't think that's going to change. It only changes when you punish the men enough for speaking, that you scare them away from like the risk, and like you make it so much more risky. You make and then they'll stop speaking as often, and then you kind of get more of a gender balance. But it has to be, kind of enforced in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine if you did scare men away, the ones that would remain would be very autistic, like people who have just no consideration of social pressures or no consciousness of social conformity. It would be a really, really weird podcasting landscape.
Yeah, I mean, well, so it's interesting because so tell me about the kind of woman that listens to you, as far as you know.
A lot of them are okay. They're usually in tech, or they're retired. Like retired professional women will listen to me. So my my listeners and readers are, and I've done surveys for 25 years, so this is consistent. Let's say an average of 85% male. I think it's just the content, the way I talk, is not. I mean, I don't know if it's repulsive.
I mean,
to women.
That's more or less my ratio, though, and mine might be worse. Actually, I think I might have a slightly higher percentage of men, but that might be the ex-Muslim thing scaring them off.
Yeah, it could be. And it's just been a consistent pattern. But I do have female listeners and readers, and they notice, like, I'll have, like, like, having male guests on is like easy mode. It's just like they'll just come on. I mean, there's some people like Virginia Prestrel. We kind of know each other. She's a good talker. They're out there, but I just can imagine that women, and like I know in scientific panels, this is a big issue. Women that are asked to be on panels are overwhelmed with requests. I have a friend. He's Latinx. He's a geneticist, and he just has a certain number of slots per year that he's gonna. By the way, I mean, I'm just gonna say, hey, Carlos, but he's a very accomplished geneticist, MacArthur genius, and all that stuff. So he's not. It's weird because sometimes they're clearly asking just because they want a Latino, and so he has like hundreds probably or whatever, and he can only go to a finite number, and that's just how it works. And it's a difficult situation when you have that demand, the demand for representation, but the supply is just not totally elastic.
Yeah. I especially in but specifically the kind of circles you swim in, you're not just talking about genetics, like, period. You're not afraid to dip into more, I guess, dangerous waters, dangerous pools. I think that's a big part of it as well. And that's definitely true of me, that there's, I think, John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry were talking about, why there's so few female sort of lone wolf maverick type thinkers and leaders. I've been thinking about it for a long time, but it's just not surprising at all, though. Something about it is super intuitive, that of course you wouldn't find women like this. And even women who are leaders, the interesting thing is, even women who really are, like, I guess, more or less emotional, maybe, I guess that's the way to phrase it, less sentimental than other women. Even they don't really emphasize that. Like, I mean, you think about like Hillary Clinton and how she like campaigned, but she never really talked about how like smart or competent she was. Like that was the thing she leaned on. She, you got the feeling that she thought she was better than you, but she wasn't going to say it. Her messaging was, I'm with her, which is banking on the sense of like fairness and egalitarianism. Like, I've been treated unfairly, and so you should vote for me, but not like I'm excellent and super competent and like I'm an amazing individual or whatever, and that's why I should be elected. But of course she thought that, right? Like, that she thought that about herself, but she just never said it. Trump said it.
Yeah, and that's a whole, like, there's a certain affect that a man can pull off partly. And it's also intersexual and intersexual, it's not just men being like, oh, she's blah, blah, blah. Women also react that same way, and that's just how it goes. So
worse to it. Like, I think like, you're more worried when you're a woman and you talk that way. You're kind of bragging and boasting or whatever. You should be much more afraid of what the other women are going to do. And that's definitely how I think about it.
Yeah, and like I generally avoid evolutionary psychological speculations, but I think one thing that you could imagine is, if you're talking a primeval primate band, they're not always matrilineal, but age peer females tend to engage in a lot of cooperative behavior. And where the men obviously, cooperative hunting is a big deal, but also men can do lone hunting. And so I think just males can be naturally more individualistic and take risks without the downside, without like, the blowback from their peers, because they're not always dependent on their peers.
Yeah.
Whereas I would say
rewarded by their peers too. Like I think men are impressed by risk taking in other men. They don't punish other men for, being boastful in the way that women do, or even just speaking in a way that without enough qualifications, I think comes across badly in female spaces. So I notice that when I'm speaking to women, only women, I'll do a lot of like, well, I think and I feel and maybe kind of, and just add more and more like, you know what I mean? Like add more qualifiers to it, make it appear as if it's not a fact. This is the conclusion I might have sort of kind of come to, it's an interesting way of speaking. I don't know why I do it, but I guess I.
No. I'm laughing because you're not the only one that does it. This is an issue I've noticed with many women where they give these preamble, qualifiers, contextualize, situate, and sometimes I'll just be like, just get to the point. Just like tell me what you think. I don't really care about all this stuff.
But if you don't do this, it's assumed that you're not just giving an opinion unless you qualify it as that. I don't know why. I don't know why it must be that.
Wait, what do you mean? Wait, what do you mean by? Oh, wait, can repeat? Elaborate on what you're saying there, because I'm not sure.
Imagine you can add the sentence "I think" to just anything, or the preamble "I think" to anything, or you can just state it. Women do this, men do that. We're talking about like various ways that women behave. We can just add "I think" to all of those sentences, and those sentences would be taken better by women.
If you say "I think,"
yeah.
Otherwise, maybe you're mansplaining. Is that where the idea of mansplaining comes from, or I don't know.
I don't know. I find it a very frustrating way to speak, but it's also something you can't really go around if you're in super feminine spaces. I just trying to, what's interesting is that I find myself avoiding more, I guess, contentious topics when I'm around other women. And Same, because with only one woman, like one-on-one, you can do anything. Then it's fine. The group dynamics don't work the same way. Like they're not there, right? It's just one woman. And you can go and you can talk about really contentious stuff. You can poke the bear. You can, imagine things. It's interesting. It's an interesting conversation. But the second you add more women, and it becomes a group, then it just becomes so much more dangerous to engage in that kind of conversation.
Yeah, and I talked about this on your podcast with Megan. In academia, it affects men too. They're not gonna speak in front of groups of women because what are they gonna say? So I think it's a general dynamic.
Yeah.
So I mean, whatever you have an institution or an organization with large numbers of women, it's going to operate differently than an institution or organization with large numbers of men. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's a whole field of industrial psychology, that looks at organizations, public sector, private sector organizations. And I don't know if people have like extensively researched and talked about this sort of thing, but I think everyone anecdotally can see it. Like Corey Clark obviously has written about this. You talked about it with Megan. Females have like much values other than truth are important for female academics. And when Carol Hooven, who wrote T, and I think was Carol on your podcast yet?
No, not yet, but she's great.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. So, but yeah, because she's great. She told me, and I've told people this, so it's like public, is like, she would go to these like heterodox academic things where people were going to defend her. And she's like, there's very few women. It's just all men.
Mm-hmm.
And she's just like, it's like, ultimately they don't really like, the truth is not the most important thing for them. And maybe it's not. Yeah. I mean, it's not that they don't care about the truth, but they care about other things. And so they're not going to emphasize the truth as, which, academia has been more explicitly, the whole idea of praxis in the world is definitely, I think, part of the move away from just truth, but to like acting in the world and making proactive changes, right?
Right. I mean, some of the most, frustrating conversations I've ever had have been with, feminist academics. I just don't touch that anymore. Anytime I see somebody and there's like, feminist philosopher or whatever in their bio, I'm like, oh, I can't even have a conversation with this person, because when we get to a point where they, feel challenged by something that I've said, the response is going to be, like they're going to switch their attack around and instead aim it at my intentions. Like, why are you asking this question? Where do you want it to go? What are you, what audience are you attempting to please by this question? And it happens actually very, very quickly. you can't even get to the point of a serious disagreement before you get there. It's interesting because I watched, I was in a, I hope I'm allowed to say this, but I was in a private meeting that Corey put together, and Carol Hooven was also there, of women only. And at the end of it, she and Carol Hooven had a disagreement about like this. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was like data. It was about data and like how we were interpreting the results of some study. I forget. And they argued for so long, like it must have been at least 15, 20 minutes. And they kept pushing back. Like one person attacked the other person, there's a rebuttal and then there's back and forth for such a long time. And neither of them gave up. I was so amazed. I remember thinking, I can't remember the last time I watched an interaction with two women and both of them have their swords up and they're not going to drop them, just to be nice. Like they think they're right and they're not going to drop it until they actually reach a conclusion, until one convinces the other or whatever. And then they decide to shift. But it was actually really amazing. And what was interesting to me is how rare of an experience that was, even for me to see,
Well, I mean, I guess the issue here is that, we're kind of talking in an essentialist way, which is not always, I mean, you have to talk in categories and kind of in an essentialist way of men and women. But the point there is it's not as if there are no women. I mean, you are like that, Carol and Corey are like that. It's not as if there are no women that don't think in a quote male way and vice versa. There are males who think in a more quote female way. It's just that when you have groups exclusively of men and groups exclusively of women, they're dominated by the dominant modality of that gender, of that sex, correct? And so we have this kind of stereotype or this caricature that emerges, which is not that far from reality. And I mean, I feel like, obviously we discuss it. I feel like we are so far from discussing it in the public discourse that it's like that elephant that's in the room. And I think it causes a lot of issues. It causes a lot of issues partly because men and women do misunderstand each other a lot of times in terms of their intentions, because they are kind of trying to do somewhat different things,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not always different. Like there's always a mix of things, but like, so for when I'm talking to people, I'm probably very extreme. I'm not trying to signal shit,
Mm-hmm.
I really don't give a fuck.
Mm-hmm.
I don't give a fuck who's listening, and I don't give a fuck really what you think beyond what I'm actually talking about. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm not trying to show I'm smart or stupid or liberal or conservative or whatever. And like there are people who've been very, very confused, and it took them a while to understand. I'm actually just saying what I'm saying, and I just don't care. I don't care what you think. I don't care what these other people think. I don't care my in-group or out-group. I mean, I'm not always like that. There's always a time and place, but a lot of times that's how I am. And it just takes a little while getting used to. My friends know how I am, And so, but I think this sort of thing happens a lot where someone is just saying something plainly and other people think it's fraught with deeper meaning. There's no deeper meaning. They're not signaling. They're not showing anything nefarious or hiding.
Yeah.
Everything's in plain sight.
That's easier for you to get away with, though. I have to say, like, I think it's very hard for at least women to assume that about another woman. I think it's easy for people in general to think, oh, he's a guy. He's speaking plainly because he's a guy, and that's how men speak sometimes. Or it's just a more common way of speaking if you're male. So it's accepted when you say, I just don't care. Or it's accepted, more readily, than it would be if you were a woman. It's assumed then you mean when you say something hurtful or that could be interpreted in a hurtful way, that is how you meant it. You meant to be cruel. You meant to have this emotional effect on somebody. You meant to offend. It wasn't that you just don't care, because women never just don't care, So I think that's. I find that it's not something people believe, even people who know me really well.
I got it.
The only other like kind of autistic-ish women or men who are kind of on the spectrum as well understand that about me, like intuitively will kind of get it and won't question me when I speak plainly. But outside of that, I know that hardly anyone believes it. And it's frustrating, but I guess I don't care enough to stop.
Sure.
I try to be careful about my words, but at some point you're so careful that it's not fun to talk anymore. It's not fun to,
Sure.
Intellectually engage. And then at that point, why am I doing this anyway? Why am I here? I think about that a lot in terms of like, what am I doing as a public speaker? Why am I here? Why am I speaking? I'm not making that much money. Like I'm not, I'm not doing the nonprofit work anymore. So there isn't this kind of like, okay, there's a need I need to address and I'm building an organization and that's fun in its own way. And it can also provide like a salary for you if you can raise the money. What I'm doing now, podcasting, kind of sort of trying to write this kind of intellectual public figure stuff. I mean, I don't anticipate that I will ever be deeply popular. And if I can, at the very least, just say what's on my mind, I don't know why I would do it in the first place.
Yeah, maybe you're focusing too much on the utility of it. Maybe it's kind of your essence, maybe that's just like the type of person you are, like there's always the kid who says the emperor has no clothes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just like it could be just your disposition, your innate disposition. Until recently, I did not make much money doing this either. And I would get asked why I do it, and I'm like, why not? I don't know. Just kind of, I have like a glutton for punishment. I did suffer, as you know, I did suffer some professional blowback and consequences, and it's changed my life in a lot of ways. But it's also like true to the way I am as a person, and so that's at least better than being closeted and kind of trimming your sails to what society wants. But there's trade-offs. There's trade-offs to that being who you are. And also the other thing that I would say is, like my friend Curtis Yarvin, who was writing these like 10,000 word essays on his Blogspot blog in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and he was a successful exited entrepreneur at that point. He wasn't like super rich, but he had enough money. And now, 15 years later, people like Mark Andreessen and Peter Thiel know his work. And, it's written about in the mainstream. Like this stuff percolates. So the influence is not immediate, but often, over 10 to 20 years, the deviants are the ones that are actually remembered because they're the ones that have anything novel to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if they aren't like crushed.
Well, because what was the smart thing to do? What was the smart thing to do in the mid 2000s? Is to be a neocon. How's that? So it's a lot of this stuff is the conformists. They do. It's a good short term strategy, but a lot of times in the long term, they're not the ones that history remembers. So not that history is paying your bills,
but it is. Yeah, history. That's a thing. History doesn't pay your bills, or it may for some people. I'm sure. It's great that Curtis Yarvin exists. He's doing well now, but as you said, he had independent money anyway, so he didn't need it. It wouldn't have been a big deal. It allowed him to write so many essays and think about this stuff so deeply for a very long period of time. I know we were going to talk a little bit about writing and like why I don't do much of it. And it's actually not that I don't do much of it. I just don't publish much of it. I do a lot of it. I write a lot. I just don't get it all out there because I want it to be this like perfect thing. But not just in a perfectionist way. Like I want the argument to feel complete and for me to be satisfied with it. And it takes a long time to get there. I feel like I have to do a lot of background reading, although I almost never reference anything. I make a point to not reference things as often as possible. Because I don't think it should be the case that you should have to be familiar with a specific theory or an author or a study or anything to get to understand the concepts that I'm trying to share. So, but even then, there's a lot of reading. There's a lot of reading that's on the back end, but who's going to pay for that? Who's going to fund that? Only like an academic kind of a career could have made this financially viable for me. And as is. I don't know.
Well, I mean, okay, that's fair. Did you read Eric Hoel's piece about cultural billionaires?
No.
Okay, so he's talking about how there's very, very few writers who make any money, but the few writers that make, say, a middle class or above living are like cultural billionaires because they have like a lot of influence. So anyway, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you never know. I mean, I think you were involved in your nonprofit stuff, just like talking about you
For a
specifically.
very long time. I mean,
yeah. So it's just like you didn't devote your time.
Got free. I just recently. So I think it might be different. I don't know. Maybe now that I have a lot more brain space to think about it, because people don't. I mean, because you also do like work, in industry, but there's a lot of your brain space goes into like management, if that's something you get into. Specifically all these different projects, raising funds, moving things forward on a day-to-day basis. People just want shit out of you. Just the admin of life takes like 3 hours. I don't know. But
you got to put in the time. You got to put in the work, as they say. A lot of writing and thought isn't like just inspirational virtuosity. It's just like thinking about it and reading about it. I mean, we've talked about this, I think, on your podcast. Like, I haven't been able to read a lot actually in the last 5 years, but I started reading a lot when I was 7, and I have really good recall. And so it's just not that difficult for me to write about things and remember books or papers that I read. And so whatever, that's not a talent. It's just like a lifetime's effort. And there were certain things that I didn't do that other people did do. Like I stopped playing video games when I was 16.
Yeah.
That's different than a lot of guys, and that was an opportunity cost. I stopped watching TV when I was 24.
You
came back with Netflix.
Well, you don't give birth to kids.
Yeah, I don't have the opportunity cost of that. Yes, which is like the biggest.
I think that's
for women,
that's
the biggest.
I think that's the biggest one. I mean, I remember when I was first looking into like, okay, should I be a writer? Like, should I, now that I'm leaving nonprofits, is this something that I should explore fully and take on? And I remember just like reading about it, looking it up and seeing what other like women had to say. And what was interesting is how often the theme of motherhood and writing came up as a totally negative like relationship. So many women saying that in order for them to be a writer at all, in order for them to have published so many books, they could not have been mothers, and they were glad they chose not to be mothers. And so many other women saying that now that they have chosen to be mothers, that they have also in their own minds sort of given up this potential career, this future potential stardom, like of being a great writer, having an interesting idea. They just have to give it up. They just have to let it rest. And I remember feeling pretty, obviously upset about that. But at the same time, that is reality. You just have to accept it if you're a woman, And I think like what Eric Hoel is talking about with his cultural billionaires, how many of them are women? Like, how many can you think about that are women?
Okay, I don't know. J.K. Rowling?
Come on. Really? That's your example? That's J.K. Rowling.
She's a literal billionaire too. She's a literal billionaire. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure there.
There's just not that many. There's not.
I don't know. My friend Megan McArdle.
She doesn't have any kids, does she?
No.
Yeah.
Okay, you know what? Like, I'm gonna think about this. Let me get back to you. Yeah, okay, that's a really good point. So I wanna pivot to where you are ideologically. I've been joking with you for many years that you're actually a conservative. I mean, it's just kind of a joke. But you're heterodox, and so it's difficult for you to be like leftist, but on the other hand, you're also like socially liberal in a lot of ways. Although recently you've been doing this whole like trad thing, So I mean, how are you feeling right now? Because we've been talking about this on and off for like 5 years.
Well,
by the way, just really quickly for the listeners who don't know, and I think most of you know, Colin Wright has that ideological thing where there's like he stays in place and the left is shifting, and there's a guy laughing at him. That guy is me. That's literally me. That's who he was thinking about. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, I don't know where I am, but I don't like the label heterodox because it doesn't. I don't feel like my perception of politics aligns with anything on the spectrum at all. And it's just sort of a bogus way to think about it now. As far as sort of trad elements that have creeped into my thinking, that's definitely real. And motherhood was a big part of that. Just facing the reality of my body and its limitations, what it imposed on me, which was a stronger force than anything I've ever felt in my life. That was hard to ignore. And it was also hard to ignore all the ways in which we empower women, as individuals, and our society is catered towards giving women as many opportunities as possible, and allowing them as much freedom as possible, and as to make their own choices. And it was impossible to ignore the ways in which all of that freedom, all of that choice of the woman came at the cost of the mother, of that role of the mother, if the woman were to choose to take it. Because it's hard for me to, I look at my mom. She grew up in Pakistan. I mean, that's where I was born as well. But when I was very young in Pakistan, we were in this multifamily home, and we lived with my dad's brothers and their families, their wives and their families. And I was running around with my cousins, all day, all the time. I loved it. It was amazing. I think for my mom, it was probably, as a woman, she probably felt policed. As a woman, she was in this like patriarchal home. She was the daughter-in-law, which in like South Asian societies is just like basically a slave sometimes, depending on how traditional and conservative your in-laws might be and what their expectations might be of their daughters-in-law. But it's not a great place to be as a woman. But as a mother, which was the perspective that I started thinking about only after becoming a mother, it was clear to me that she had the kind of time that I couldn't imagine, because I always had to have an eye on, my kid. There was nobody to watch after my child for even, the 5 minutes it would take for me to go take a shower or whatever. There was nothing, there was no extra help around, because I didn't live in that kind of society. And it was clear to me that it was easier on my mother, that kind of a society in which she didn't have a lot of freedoms as a woman. She did have a lot of comforts as a mother. That's true.
I guess the issue that I have is sometimes, with feminism, we thought that all women are Betty Friedan's. And the reality is most humans are not going to do a job or a career that's going to make a big difference. And that's going to be incredibly fulfilling.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys, honestly, they would rather just sit home and play video games. They don't really like their jobs. And a lot of women, they would probably be happier, like having, babies and kids and all these sorts of things, as opposed to doing whatever they're doing. And I think there's been a little bit of a skew in our society because of the outsized influence of very, very high achieving verbal professionals. That's the way I'm going to say it.
Yeah. And what's interesting about Friedan is that she's one of the few second wave feminists who had kids, like who was a mother. There's far more that who died childless in the second wave in particular.
Yeah. Well, Gloria Steinem's still around. She's not active, but she's still around. No children.
No kids there. It's hard to think of like another prominent second wave feminist who had kids.
Yeah. And maybe that's okay. That's something we need to like talk about, but it's kind of sad. I know that in academia, a lot of the females, women in the 70s and 80s, they just decide not to have children because of their career. Mm-hmm. And then, they would get divorced or their husband would die. Mm-hmm. And, I've heard of situations where their, closest caregiver, the closest thing to a child that they had was their last postdoc or their last graduate student.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah. It's just,
I don't know what we're going to do as, an increasing amount of those people age and there aren't enough caregivers to take care of them. I can't imagine.
It's got to be immigration. Honestly, I know some people are going to get mad about that, but we're going to just bring in a lot more Filipinos.
Right. And then you're going to hire a nurse to take care of you and hope that she takes care of you as well as
The reality is they don't. We all know that.
Yeah. I mean, these substitutes for for family don't work in real life, and we know that. And it frustrates me so much to have this conversation over and over again in the same way, and to have feminists repeat some of these talking points about how we just need more childcare. We just need more childcare. And if we had more childcare and state-sponsored childcare, then everything would be great for working moms. But I don't think it would, because I do not think that a caregiver a woman you pay will take care of your child the same way as a mom would. I don't think women are comfortable thinking of, leaving their children in daycare for 10 hours a day, which is how long it would take, right? And 8 hours of work, like you need to drop the kid off at a certain time. You need to go to work. You have your full 8 hours. Then you pick the child up. Like by that time, they've been there for 10 hours, which is most of their wake, most of their day.
I mean, conversations like these, is why I think sometimes it sounds like you're going through your Phyllis Schlafly phase, but I'm just joking.
No, I think there is a group of people, who are being silenced. There is a group. I guess maybe I would say that it's mothers. I think it's families in general, but young families in particular. Older families have kind of a different thing going on, but I know that from my perspective, as somebody who was sold, I feel like a bill of goods. I am angry about the difficulties of just starting a family, and I'm also angry about the discussion, because it's all based on money, that we just don't have enough of it. But that's not the problem. The problem is not lack of money. The problem is lack of a community of human beings to help you take care of this child.
Well, I mean, also, okay, that's fair. That's fair. We don't have neighborhoods the way we used to, but also I think that people have not weird, but they have certain expectations of vacations and leisure time and whatnot. And this is worldwide. When I see in China, they ask women why they're not marrying and having children. They're like, well, I want to focus on my career and travel. I'm like, okay, is that really a substitute for having children? I don't know, but that's the exact same thing that I hear here, in the United States. And a lot of it is self-serving. I don't know where it's coming from. One of my Twitter things that kind of went viral was I was talking to a young woman, and she was like, well, I don't think I'm going to have children, because the planet, and I really like to travel. Right. And I was like, okay, but if you're on a plane, and like she got like pretty like flustered because she had never thought about that. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, because like, I mean, you're just making excuses. You just like to travel. I mean, whatever, it's fine. And also, you're 29. I don't know what, she was 29, I think. So who knows what she's going to say in 5-6 years? But the problem is, who knows what her fertility, because like people differ. There's some people who start having problems in their mid-30s. Anyway.
She doesn't know. She probably doesn't know. I didn't know. I was lucky that I ended up in a social circle where there were several like women who were in their mid-30s when I was in my mid-20s. And I was able to see up close their fertility difficulties and how often they had to resort to IVF. I would have had no idea if it wasn't for that like very like real example like in front of my face. I couldn't possibly ignore it. Up until then, I thought it was just like a right-wing meme. Like I just thought it was something that trolls did to harass women who wanted to like go to school or go to college or whatever, and I do think there is a way in which like I think that kind of like troll, like right-wing troll discourse really does backfire a lot. I think it does push young women away. And they're right to feel demeaned by it and limited by it. And why wouldn't, this like leftist fantasy of like, okay, you're going to go, girl boss fantasy of you're going to go travel everywhere. You're going to have all these wonderful experiences and come out this like super sophisticated cosmopolitan person. And then you can, have a child. Why wouldn't that be alluring? Why wouldn't you run headfirst into that?
Yeah, I do have to say, I've alluded to people that I knew in my 20s in the Bay Area, and there was a woman. She's about 5 years, I think 5 years younger than me. This woman, talked about her fertility struggles, and I just saw last month that she was 6 months pregnant after 5 years. So I don't know the details, but she was pregnant, and I noticed on Instagram she's smiling constantly. Mm-hmm. So That was good. There were a lot of, for many years, there were a lot of kind of melancholy posts, where her face, I mean, she was doing normal things, but her face was kind of strained, I think, in a way where, like that was like, she had her dog and her husband, that same guy, and she's been trying to have kids for years and years and years, and now she's just smiling all the time.
Yeah.
And, now I know. So that was a good outcome. I have another friend who I have not heard anything from, and I think that's probably bad. Like the whole infertility thing, by the way, for those of you as you're getting older and you have friends in the situation, it's the most awkward thing because you definitely don't want to ask.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's there, you can't say anything, and it's one of the biggest things in their life.
Yeah. 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 And it is it's just a difficult thing to talk about because by the time you start to have the conversation with women at that age, all you can do is support them. There's not really much you can do to help them because they recognize, okay, I am having this problem. They're taking care of it the best they can. They're already in it. But with younger women, it's really still impossible to bring up the fact that they have a limitation there, especially since partners aren't easy to find. Like young men who are also thinking in that way. They want to pare down. They want to be providers. I think it's very bleak out there for a young woman who is marriage minded. I don't think she's going to have an easy time finding a partner at all. The best thing she can do is to marry a man who is older than she would prefer otherwise. Like if you're 21 and you're looking for somebody, or 22 or something, like fairly young, and you're looking to have children young and get that over with, and then move on to your career or whatever it is that you want to do. But if you want to get that out of the way, and this is something you want, you want the kid, so you want to pursue it first. There are not a lot of, 25, 26-year-old guys who are ready to take that on, and that might be the age that you find most attractive and most appealing. But that those guys are basically babies, like they're not ready to provide at all. And they're increasingly unwilling to as well. I noticed that when I talk about moms staying home, and the sacrifices that families might have to take in order for, in order for a family to go from a 2-income household to a 1-income household, that dad has to provide now. And it's a lot of stress, but this is something that, he has to do. It's a lot of young men who are mad about it, and they respond with something about how the state should be taking care of this. And there should be more maternity leave or paternity leave or whatever. I don't think they're not ready to accept the difficulties of the provider role either.
Yeah. It's a symbiosis. We talked a lot about online communities and how they're crazy and they say crazy things, and it's kind of radicalizing the people online. I don't know how much it's affecting the real world, but the reality is, I have to be honest, like I feel like online eventually does percolate into real world with memes and all sorts of things. So, there are many things that I laughed about 5 years ago that are just whatever part of the discourse in the real world now, and people don't know where they came from, you know?
Yeah.
And so we got to be careful about
definitely for younger people. I don't even think they have a distinction, like I think my generation is like millennials are the last generation that see a distinction between the online world and the quote unquote real world. I don't think, if anything, I would say that Zoomers are more inclined to view their real life as a reflection of their online life than the other way around.
Yeah, so I've heard that Zoomers, they meet people online or offline after they meet them online.
Yeah.
So the causality or the sequence is inverted, and it's all blurred together. And I've experienced this too. And I have I have like some Zoomer followers, and just talking to them is kind of a trip because they cannot even conceive of a world before social media.
Yep. Yeah.
Or
the news
so that's
in particular. Like they don't know what the internet was like before there were news feeds on every social media platform. Like you had to manually click on people's profiles.
That's why I uploaded that. I started doing uploads of the podcast to YouTube, because Zoomers don't like to subscribe to things proactively. They just want the algorithm to feed them.
Oh wow.
Yeah, they've explicitly told me this.
That's upsetting. That's really upsetting. But the position it puts you in, though, is that you have to, you have to prioritize a life that is that looks great in pictures, and parenthood is not that life. So if you're a young woman and you are optimizing for the kind of life that looks great on Instagram, because that is how you meet people, that is how you get to know people, but that's also how you understand yourself. That's how you measure your own progress through life. How would you just suddenly you can't partake in the same way. If you become a mother, that has like just so many indirect effects too, because now other young women can't see you. They can't see your life, they can't see what's going on, they can't see the joys of it, because it's literally filthy and not Instagrammable.
Well, I mean, just here's a random question. I've always wondered, or I've wondered, like, in some ways, I feel like with pregnancy and motherhood, on the one hand, women are really scared by it, and they think it's like, this whole idea. I don't know if it's statistically true, but that abortion is safer than pregnancy, and so pregnancy is like this dangerous medical thing, even though people have been doing it for forever. And a lot of the high infant mortality rates in early modernity had to do with doctors and germ theory, their lack of knowledge. Setting that aside, though. Then you have this other issue, and I saw. Did you see the tweets from? I think Default Friend was.
Yeah.
There, just talking like okay, like I've seen birth. I know what I know what goes on. So I'm nothing there was like super shocking to me, but like it's difficult, and there's a lot of grotty, definitely not Instagrammable stuff that's going down, and I feel like there's a schizophrenia between lack of awareness of a lot of concrete realities, but then also an exaggeration of other aspects. And if I was a young person, I would be a little confused too, actually.
What would you say is an exaggeration?
Well, the idea that pregnancy is... So I know we've talked about this. I know that it was like a big deal for you, but it varies. And for a lot of women, like I can tell you from my wife, she's taller, and so it just tends to be, I think, a fact that larger women, taller women, for them, pregnancy is much, quote, easier. So, she didn't like look that different from behind during the first pregnancy at all. Actually, she just grew like kind of, in the front, but there was no like massive weight gain and all these other things. And so it's not always like a parasite in your body that's like totally destroying you. No, it is for some people. My sister honestly was more in the latter category. And so I think that, I mean,
it could be a whole number of things. You know what I mean? And I think that's, you're right that there are elements of it. I think labor is exaggerated a little bit as this like extreme event because it's just so dramatic and it's something that we see reflected in, media all the time. So that's something we know about. But the everyday problems, I think we are less likely to be aware of. I didn't even know prior to actually going through it that there could be like I didn't know what morning sickness was. You know what I mean? Like I thought it was literally something that you maybe threw up in the morning once or twice, and that's how you knew you were pregnant because that's what I saw on TV, and that's as much as I knew about it. So I thought that it was mild nausea that would happen primarily in the morning, I guess, because it's called morning sickness, and that it would just be this silly little thing where you just sort of throw up and maybe something smells funny and then you throw up. And then that was the extent of it. What I got was this severe type of nausea where you literally cannot take any food or water, and you start starving. And it's extreme and it lasts for some women, some very unlucky women, it lasts till the end and they need like persistent care, like a lot of care throughout their pregnancy. For many, it gets a lot better after the first trimester, but it doesn't go away. And I was one of those women. I just basically didn't eat for like weeks, like properly, and needed a lot of care at that time. You have a lot of muscle wasting as well that happens if your fluids and if you're not being monitored, it's easy for you to get an electrolyte imbalance because you're not intaking enough fluids. to have a good balance of anything. It can be a very severe situation, and it was for me. And it can also lead to a lot of other problems, which also happened to me, right? Like they just one after another. It was just like a cascade of different health problems. And it wasn't anything I knew anything about until it happened. I didn't even know that I was just thinking like, maybe I'm just being a pussy, like I need to, I don't know if I can say this in a podcast, but, I just thought maybe I was just being weak and other women go through this. And there was, what's wrong with me that I can't go through this, until I realized how bad it was. And it, that can happen, right? That can happen. You can have a lot of other dental problems. You can have diabetes. You can, and all these complications that lead out from diabetes. So it just depends a little bit on luck, I think, because my mother did not have this issue. I had this issue. I expected an easy pregnancy. I mean, I'm youngish. I'm fairly healthy. I didn't think it was going to happen to me. And it did. And it caused a lot of problems throughout the pregnancy, but also after. They lasted with me for some time. I still have some problems to this day. And I'm not happy, listening to, even conservatives when they talk about abortion. I mean, not to pivot too much, but it does irritate me when people just sort of dismiss the trials of pregnancy, because it really can be, really can be a very difficult time that leads to lifelong complications for some people. And that's a risk that every woman is taking. And that informs the way that I think of that issue as well.
Yeah. No. I knew some of this in kind of high level, but I didn't know it in detail. I'd also have to say, we hung out recently. You pretty much look the same as before externally, so people must get a wrong impression of the pregnancy.
Right. So I didn't look like I was having problems, but I was. And that's another part of the frustration, because for me, I mean, there have been changes, like body changes as well. Every woman talks about it to some degree. Your stomach doesn't look the same. Your boobs look different forever. Your skin is a little bit, looser, from just from the swelling alone. I think I just have like looser skin now. Whatever. That's not the biggest problem for me. That's not the thing that I cry about. That's not the thing that most women that I know who have had difficult pregnancies really focus on. It's a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah. Well, okay. Let's. We've been talking for a while. Let's close out. With I want to talk about where you position yourself ideologically, or if that's just not even a question that is relevant anymore for you, because you're not with XMNA. You have your own thing that you're doing, but you're not speaking on behalf of an organization or a movement. Mm-hmm. Do you just go say, this is what I believe, and that's what it is, and people can figure it out?
It's been deeply freeing, like moving away and not feeling the responsibility of representing an organization. And I've been wanting it for a very long time, because it's not me, it's not me to have to feel as if I can't say certain things, to feel responsible for other people's jobs, or their careers. And I would never want the people that I knew, who were taking a great deal of risks in the first place, to have to then experience extra blowback based on some of the things that I was saying. And at first, the issue was gender. Like that was the thing that I was just itching to talk about, but I felt like I couldn't because of my role. I was already carrying this one cross, and there's only so many, I heard somebody describe it as weirdness points. I forget who it was. It's somebody I read on Twitter all the time. But he said that, you only have a certain amount of weirdness points, and you have to think about that when you're a public figure. Like there's certain things that you can speak up about and be the weird guy, but then you have to be normal everywhere else, or otherwise you're just going to be ignored. And I was thinking about that quite a bit as well. The problem is I am weird, the problem is that I actually am weird. So I don't know if this means that I'm going to have less of a following from here on out, but at least it'll be, true to who I am.
Well, I mean, I think when, people, The issue is like you can get really who was actually I don't remember his name. It's probably good. There's a guy at the Daily Wire who is really smart, has a philosophy degree, and I know people who went to Yale with him, and you can tell he's kind of smart, but he has this huge audience and he makes a lot of vapid assertions, just vapid, smug assertions.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I don't think that that's actually him, but I think this is who he has to be to have an audience of millions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if he kept it like high tone, if he kept it really leveraging all the stuff he knew,
mm-hmm.
And tried to keep it intellectual, he would have an audience of 50,000,
Right. Right.
As it is, he has an audience of like 2 million or 3 million or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so that's really not about who the person is ideologically. It's about what they want to be in the broader landscape. Mm-hmm. And if you want to be Ben Shapiro, you better have a coherent, recognizable ideology that can slot into a broad movement,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's really no... Yeah.
I think that if you want... If this is how you're going to make your money, like if this is how you're going to pay your rent, you have a tough time, making that, like that balance is maybe impossible for most of us. And I wouldn't even attempt it, frankly, because I already tried to do it to some degree. I mean, for me, it wasn't about paying the rent. It was about supporting this cause, supporting this movement, and benefiting this organization and making sure that I'm the kind of public figure that reflects well on this organization. But I found that deeply stifling. And I think that that needing to earn this, to earn income through this kind of work would be similarly stifling.
Yeah, I think one thing that I'll say is someone like Joe Rogan, and we talked about Rogan before, it's actually lost me a subscriber because I platformed someone who talked positively about Joe Rogan.
Sorry, that was me. Yeah, that was me. Oh no, did I really? This one, maybe. So that is what I'm facing. Though. Like the more I am openly me, the more I'm costing myself followers and subscribers. And you know what? I'm okay with it.
Yeah,
I'm okay with it because I think what you're left with is something better.
The issue is like Rogan's an interesting point because he is heterodox, doesn't have like strong ideological valences, but he also has UFC people on and all this stuff. So he's actually has a income stream that doesn't depend on some ideological movement. That's just kind of like a side aspect of his persona, And I think I honestly I would say that I'm not obviously Rogan scale, but I don't think people listen to me for my trenchant political opinions. I mean, there's it's like I have like some generic. I have like a bundle of opinions but you can find them elsewhere. It's the other scientific stuff, and I just let the mask slip and I'll say what I think. But since I don't like generate, I don't think I generate that much income from the ideological stuff. I think that's just like part of who I am. That it works that way. But if it's your brand, well, there's only so many positions in the marketplace is the issue. And people who are libertarian, like at Reason and stuff, have talked about this problem for years. They would get called out to MSNBC or Fox News like once and never come back because they're just harder to predict.
People don't like
or
that.
Like people want like people that they know what they're gonna say and what they're gonna do,
and it's something that's easy to translate into like a soundbite.
Yes, a product. So basically what we would say in tech is Sarah, you are hard to productize, so that's one of the many crosses you have to bear. Anyway, I've been talking to you for a while. I know you are a mom, you have stuff to do, and I hope everyone listens to A Special Place in Hell. You have Hold the Thought, you have the Substack, and I'll put all the links out there. And I hope just keep doing what you're doing until you're sick of it. Because if you're sick of it, you should stop.
Okay, not yet sick of it.
I'm not sick of it. Like so it's like I keep doing this stuff. If I was really sick of it, I would just disappear and go work at some genomic consultancy or whatever.
Right. I think if I was just sick of it, I would just stop. I would just go.
Yeah. Just don't do it. You could tell.
If Trump wins, I might get sick of it quickly. I think because could you imagine the cultural war commentary that would it would just be hell forever, and I would not want to participate in that shitstorm. So
yeah. I mean, you're gonna love it. You're gonna love the next 4 years. It'll be beautiful.
God. Yeah. All right.
All right, I'll talk to you later, Sarah. Bye.
Bye.
If you have a sibling with autism, your future child's risk for an autism diagnosis is increased by a factor of 2 to 3.5. Orchid's whole genome embryo reports can help mitigate your child's risk by screening for over 200 genetic variants, definitively linked to autism and other neurodevelopmental disorders. Discuss your situation with a genetics expert.
This podcast for kids